to my fellow instrumentalists who have already subscribed to the channel, and hi to the rest of you who haven't yet. I'm Jacques Gadway, and this is Gadway Violin. In today's episode, or today's live stream rather, we're taking a look at 6 carols and 6 gifts, or etudes. Today we're working on the first Noel. You just heard me playing a little bit of the etude associated with O Holy Night that we did yesterday. That was really tricky, so I wanted to play through it a little bit today because I wasn't super happy with how I played it yesterday. But if you missed that live stream, definitely check it out when you have a chance. We go over arpeggios, classic fingerings for 3-octave arpeggios, and how to play O Holy Night. Today's video, however, we're going to do something totally different. We're going to take a look at the very famous carol, The First Noel. In this packet of 6 carols and 6 etudes, or gifts, you'll find 6 famous carols: O Holy Night, The First Noel, which we're doing today, Hark the Herald Angels, Silent Night, Away in a Manger, and We Three Kings. Each of these that I'm calling an etude, and each of these variations are going to accomplish a certain or specific technique. Yesterday's video we went over the first carol, O Holy Night, and the first etude, which dealt with arpeggios. In today's video we're going to look at the second carol, the first Noel, and of course the second etude, which is going to tackle the spiccato stroke. So if you're looking to learn this beautiful carol and or learn how to do spiccato on the violin, you're in the right place. If you're not looking to do either of those things, stick around anyways, because we're going to learn some violin and play some beautiful music along the way. We're going to start right here with this carol. All of these carols and etudes are available in the packet that you can actually purchase, or you can just take a screenshot right here so you can use at home for your own practice. On the left of the screen you see the full carol, and on the right you see most of the etude. You can also follow along on screen as we go. Alright, with that, let's get started. All of these have been already fingered and bowed, so we're going to pretty much use exactly what I have written and edited in the parts. So if you're looking to learn this carol, or perhaps just to play it for yourself and feel festive, or to play it for your loved ones who've been wondering what you've been doing with your violin hobby all this time, this is a good time to try and learn it. It's actually one of the simpler carols, and it's really quite beautiful. The way that I've written it out, it takes advantage of some more advanced techniques at the very end, where we're shifting and going quite high on the instrument, but definitely is not necessary. We can take all of those notes down the octave, or we can simplify the ending and do basically a repeat of what we had earlier in the piece. Let's take a look. So if you look here, starting here in what's called measure 115, we can see we have the second part of the carol, which is basically the same as the first part. And if you look closely, this and the next part are basically identical. We've just changed the ending to make it sound more final. But if this is out of your bounds of playing, for example, we're going all the way up into 7th position here, you don't have to. You can simply repeat this section and it should sound the same. The only difference is that when you repeat it, you would want to elongate that last note. So as an alternative, so you don't have to do all this crazy shifting, you could simply end with repeating that section. So imagine we've played this, and then instead of going on, we're going to repeat. And you can end right there, just holding that last note and slowing down a little bit. But if you're feeling adventurous, you want to learn and practice some more advanced positions, definitely take advantage of this last bit of the first Noel, because we're going to shift up and make it sound really final. These fingerings are exactly what we're doing. Whenever you see the dash in this part, it's going to mean that we're shifting. So we're in 2nd position, shifting up to 4th, and then shifting up to 7th position. I should note that in 7th position, I'm opting to do 2, 3, both of which are going to be stretched fingers. So we might circle them to indicate that in our own practice. That's because in 7th position, if we were to play this G natural, technically what naturally would play that is our 3rd finger, but we're going to use our 2nd so that we can stretch for our 3rd and have an easier time vibratoing that final note. We just get a nice, easier vibrato on the 3rd finger. If we instead did it as is natural, we do a 3rd finger here, and then we'd have to stretch this 4th finger all the way up. And you can definitely vibrato it. It's just a little bit more tense and awkward, in my opinion. Honestly, I'd prefer, even if I wanted to use the 4th finger, I'd still prefer using the 2nd finger here, just like we've done in the past with our arpeggio fingerings. If you haven't seen that, in the last live stream we did, we went over this other etude, which accompanies O Holy Night. And that is going to tell you all about standard arpeggio fingerings. All right, a couple things to note when playing this to make it sound really beautiful and to really enjoy all that the carol has to offer. This is actually probably my favorite Christmas carol. It's all about bow distribution and not feeling stuck, so that you can really give when you need to for all of your phrasing. We start in 3rd position at the very beginning as written here. And whenever you're reading a part that I've made, in this case, I've written this out for the violin with my own fingerings. Whenever you're reading something like that for me, I'm only going to write a fingering to indicate a change in position or an initial position. After that, you can assume you're going to use any finger that is naturally occurring in that position to accomplish that note. So for example, we have a 3rd finger indicating 3rd position to start, and then we don't have any other fingerings. And that's because we're just going to stay in 3rd position and place the exact finger you'd expect. And when we're in a position that's not 1st position, I'm always going to indicate if you should use an open string versus whatever finger you'd expect to use in that position. So since there's no open strings, we can assume we're always going to use a stopped note for any of those open string potentials. So from the beginning, there's so much potential and natural nuance and shape to this beautiful melody, and it's really a matter of deciding where you want to go with it, what you want your peaks and valleys to look like. In general, I think in every single phrase we should have a peak, and in every single piece we should have a peak. So if we define this first phrase as going from here to here, then we should find a single peak within it. We can find multiple peaks, but we should find the largest peak, or where we're going to in that phrase. And then we should find the overarching peak within the entire piece. You can think of it like states and cities, right? You're going to have lots of cities within the state, but you got to have a capital city. You got to have that place that everything is corresponding with. Maybe that's not the best analogy. But in this case, for me, there's a clear shape to the line, and you can kind of just follow it. But if you notice, if we try to use the literal shape of the line, we're going to end up with an inability to decide on a hierarchy, because our top note, C, is repeated 3 times. And if we wanted to simply use that as a metric for where the peak of our phrase is, then we're going to have the same peak, right? 3 times in a row. So we have to decide if we first want to follow the shape of the line. Then we have to decide, okay, well then which of those peaks is our capital of this phrase, or which of those peaks is our most prominent. And in general, you're going to use harmony to make these decisions a lot of the time. But really, I would encourage you to just use your inclination, because ultimately what music you've listened to, what you decide you enjoy most about music is going to be the best information for making musical choices, in my opinion. For me personally, it feels like we're ramping up, maybe less, and then we have this final peak before the end, indicating that this is going to be kind of our biggest show of force here. So not quite a big peak here. We're kind of enjoying the inflection, but we're not establishing it as the prominent arrival. One of my musical theory ideas that I like to really live by is whenever you have repetitions in music, you kind of have to do one of 2 things. You either have to grow upon them, or you have to retreat from them. So repetitions can either be reinforcements, in other words, or they can be echoes, right? And we can treat these C naturals as kind of repetitions, right? Right? And so we can decide if we either want them to be echoes or reinforcements. And for me, it just feels natural. I don't have a better explanation. It feels natural. Perhaps it's the way I've heard this song the most. But it feels like we're really winding up, and finally delivering. Winding up. And then finally. So we find, if we like that that's the shape of our phrase. But that phrase is one of 4 in the entire song. And each time we do one of these phrases, we have our own peak inside of it, but we should have a peak that conquers all, the King of Kings, if you will. And where is that going to be? Generally, in music, just like in storytelling, your peak should be somewhere in the 3rd act, I think, right? Your rising action and falling action if you're telling a story. I think it's very similar to playing music. When you have a song, a piece of music, or any kind of overarching performance, you want there to be this gain of steam, this arrival, and then this kind of release. So sometimes that arrival, that total climax, can be the very end. And we certainly could do that here. But even if that's the case, we should have a second one, or a kind of peak of conflict somewhere in the story, in the 3rd act. So why don't we just, if there's 4 phrases, let's just pick the 3rd phrase, and wherever we want that peak to be, to just assume that that's going to be the peak of our piece here. So I picked it, measured 122 as you see there. We're just kind of arbitrarily picking this spot. And we're going to see how it works. We're winding up. Here we go. Then we do the same thing. Since we're ending kind of ridiculously there, I mean, you could argue it makes more sense to have the true peak be at the very, very end. But either way, we should have a sense of somewhere in the third act, that 3/4 mark, where we have a real, true rising action and where the peak conflict or peak excitement happens. I think this is a very decent way to do it. Something I should add is just because we do this kind of pinch pull, I like to call it, and that comes from opening a bag of chips. If you've ever opened a bag of chips, it's really hard to get it on the very first go. So I would always think of it as you pinch, pull, and it finally opens. We're doing that musically here, right? We have the pinch, pull, where we finally open it, and we get that little peak here. Just because we've decided we're doing that for the first phrase, and the second phrase looks very similar, it's basically identical, doesn't mean that the second phrase needs to follow the same shape. In fact, we can reverse it and have them kind of mirror each other so that the larger idea feels complementary. So what if instead of pinch, pull, we did a pull, pinch? I mean, I don't know if the analogy translates, but you get the point. We'll just briefly taste what that is before we move on from this carol to the etude. So we're pinching. Here's the pinch. You wind up. And then finally. And now we're going away. Relax. So we can have a kind of mirror there too. That works totally appropriately in my opinion. But what you end up deciding to do is really personal, right? And whenever you're making these phrase decisions, I think having a reasoning or a framework for how you make these decisions, or at least how you're kind of pacing them, is the most important thing. And I think the main idea is whenever you have a phrase, you should find a peak and a valley, at least one of both. And then in the entire piece, you should have a peak and a valley, right? And so we have these little cities, and we have the capital city of great import somewhere, usually in the third act of the story, the third quarter of the piece, right? Or perhaps the very end. With that, after you've learned this carol, if you have the packet, or if you took a second to screenshot it, you can see on the right side of the screen here that we have our spiccato etude that is going to accompany it. If you screenshot that, you can use that at home in your own practice. You can also find it in the link below on my website for download. I will warn you, it does cost money to do that. It's very inexpensive, and it's a great way to support the channel. But more importantly, you have access to it right here, and you can follow along in the video as we go. But the point is, in this packet, every single one of the 6 carols will be accompanied by an etude. In this case, the first Noel, our second carol, is accompanied by this etude. We call it the first Noel Spiccato. And we're basically just doing a variation of the first Noel using the spiccato stroke. And in practicing it, we can help strengthen our spiccato this holiday season. Ran out of music there because I don't have my foot page turner with me. But you get the point. It's literally the same thing as the melody outline from the first Noel, but we're taking advantage of that very well-known melody that we have in our ear and using the spiccato stroke, doubling each of the eighth notes and, filling in all of those gaps with perpetual motion. Now, one of the benefits of doing this for a carol or a very well-known melody, something that we've just practiced, is that we can try our best now when we're doing our spiccato stroke to actually maintain our phrasing. It's one thing to practice our spiccato on scales and to practice it on these etudes without really any musical framework. It's another to practice it in a way that's actually going to be it's actually going to translate to your musical use cases, right? When you're playing an orchestra, when you're playing at home on a different piece of repertoire, spiccato isn't just some mechanical thing that we do with no goal in mind. We still have to phrase our music with our spiccato. And we just spent all this time learning our first Noel and talking about peaks and valleys and talking about phrasing this beautiful melody. We get to use all of that, all of the decisions we made, and we have to try our best with the spiccato stroke to still continue to bring it all out. So if you can see the original melody in here, we can reuse the same ideas, right? So one of the ideas we talked about was what I like to call our pinch, pinch, pull. Pinch, pinch, pull, our peak being right here, right? And then we have that mirrored phrase. We can pick that out right here, where we start again. We had talked about doing the opposite, where we do our arrival here, and then we kind of come away each of these additional times we hit the peak of our phrase. So we can try to mirror that, and in doing so, maintain consistency of our balance, which is really tricky to do and not something that you can necessarily practice without having a musical goal in mind. Here's our pinch. Here's our final. Less. Whoops, I talked. Less. So just like we did with our, it's hard to talk and play at the same time. Just like we did, I mismarked this, in the other page, in the original version, we're creating these phrases again. The phrase here actually starts here. I don't know why I wrote it in the wrong place. I'm going to use a different color. And we talked in the original Noel, if we look at our first two phrases, in this first phrase we talked about having our pinch, pinch, pull, a little bit, and the most, right? And then we talked about doing the opposite here, the most, little less, and even less. And we can see that exactly here. And the struggle is trying to do that, bring that out while maintaining our very consistent spiccato. so forth. We've talked a lot about what the goal is, right? We're doing this spiccato. We're trying to keep it consistent while we're doing our phrases. But let's talk a little bit about how we actually accomplish this spiccato, this off-the-string stroke. I would like to point out, if you haven't watched it before, I've made a couple videos on this channel that aren't live streams, that are pretty decently edited and a little bit more concise perhaps, on spiccato strokes with a few etudes on how to practice them and the actual technique in creating these bouncing strokes. But we'll talk about it briefly here as well. But definitely check it out on the channel and make sure you're subscribed so you get notifications to videos like that in the future. But basically, when we're doing our spiccato stroke, the most important thing before you can do a spiccato stroke, and perhaps you can practice it in this etude, is to make sure that you have a very good détaché stroke. More importantly, what you want is to have a very good détaché stroke that does a few things really well. One is that we want it to make sure that when we do our détaché stroke, we don't hear excessive difference between our down bows and our up bows. In other words, the consistency and weight and strength between the two is as consistent and similar as possible. Another thing we want to really focus on is that our sounding point does not change while we play. I mean, it's hard to exaggerate here. Let's see. So we don't want to see our down bows drifting and our up bows drifting back. We want, as much as possible, our stroke to be perfectly perpendicular. We also want to make sure that the motion in our hand is not, or our bow hold is not overly pronated. I tend to try to feel like my hand is supinated, meaning rotated towards my pinky, so not so angled, to allow for the bow to move in the most natural path, because off-the-string strokes are so much about getting out of the way of the bow and only giving what you need to assist in the bow's motion, because the bow naturally wants to bounce. Another thing to consider is that we really shouldn't need to use our first finger much at all. Especially if you're doing a slower bounce, you should be able to do it with your first finger off of the violin entirely. When we're doing spiccato strokes, our tempo determines entirely how far off of the string our bow should be. It also determines where in the bow we should be. Generally, if I'm getting really fast with my spiccato, we're going to be very close to the string with our bow, meaning sometimes it gets so fast, like a sautille stroke, that we're not actually leaving the string at all. The bow is just kind of bouncing, but the hair stays in contact. And for that kind of stroke, as we get really fast and close to the string, I prefer to actually bring the bow further from the balance point. So playing a little bit further out allows me to do that with a little bit more ease. I tend to want to be closer to the frog or to the balance point when I want more control over the stroke. In other words, when we're doing a little bit more of a slow pace and we need to have more specific control over each bounce. So the more control I want to have over each actual action, the closer to the frog I want to be. Also, the slower my stroke is, the more of my arm I use, because the bigger the stroke ends up being. And the faster, the exact opposite happens. The faster we go, the more we just use our wrist. Something to try when you're practicing this, if you have trouble with consistency in the strength of your down bows and up bows, you should try with détaché first, going just opposite directions, doing all of your strong beats on up bows. You might need to do it a little slower, like I do, to make sure it's good. You might find that your coordination between your left hand and right hand, like I do, is not quite as excellent as you had hoped. simple thing, changing the direction of the bow, can mess with your brain so much. You can hear how uneven that is compared to what I was doing before. It almost sounds a little swung. But as you get it more even, the reverse will become even more easy and comfortable to do. Let's play the rest of this. We'll go right from 151. I didn't write it, but the fingering should be exactly the same as in the first Noel part. Right, where we just shift up to 1 there, shift up to 1 there, use the stretched second finger and the stretched third finger. The most gigantic, out of place fingerings I could have written. Alright, with that, we've learned our first Noel and the accompanying etude, and in doing so we've given ourselves the gift of practicing spiccato using a very beautiful melody. Again, if you want to find this sheet music, you can find it on my website. There's a link in the description below. You can also just find earlier in the video where I showed the entirety of both of these pieces of sheet music so that you can screenshot it and use it in your practice at home. With that, I wish you the best. Happy holidays. We'll be back tomorrow to learn the third carol and the third etude. Happy practicing, and thank you so much for watching.